The film we're talking the film we're talking about, I wish I had the DVD at hand, but I don't. It's all the way over there, is by the Russian master Andrei Tarkovsky. Andrei, and until recently I would have said Rublev, but I'm gonna upgrade my pronunciation here and say Andrei Rublev, because that's how the Russians seem to pronounce it, even though it's spelled Rublev in our feeble English transliteration. So this is reputed as one of the great masterpieces of spiritual filmmaking from one of the great spiritual filmmakers. Nathan, can you maybe just talk about Tarkovsky a little bit and introduce people to this filmmaker and why you think he's so important?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure many of our listeners will be familiar with Andrei Tarkovsky, a Russian filmmaker. He was, born in I don't remember the exact date, in the 1930s, came of age in the 1950s and 60s, went to film school in the Soviet Union, learned his craft in the 1950s, and came into this period of Soviet history, which has been kind of known as the Khrushchev thaw, when Russian or Soviet culture was opening up to outside influences again after Stalinism, after the death of Stalin. And so part of that would have been other film cultures coming into to being seen by Soviet audiences. And so Tarkovsky, was a student at film school in this time and began, was one of many who began to absorb influences that were not from the classic Soviet school of filmmaking, which, just for a tiny bit of context, Soviet cinema in the 1920s and 30s, but especially in the 1920s, that was one of the major experimental schools of filmmaking, of silent cinema. And anyone who ends up studying the history of cinema will come across Sergei Eisenstein and other Soviet directors who were very active in pushing the boundaries of what this young art of cinema could do. And the kind of the keystone expression of that was what's come to be known as montage theory, which is, in a nutshell, we could do a whole podcast on that. But essentially, I think it's important for understanding the context of what makes Tarkovsky.
I knew this was going to happen as soon as Thomas was like, can you give a brief introduction of Tarkovsky? It's like, all right, here we go.
Let's just get it out of the way. Let's get all the film history stuff out of the way so that I think we can talk about the film more from a spiritual kind of perspective. Montage theory is this practice of filmmaking that basically involves creating meaning through the juxtaposition of images. So it comes out of the Marxist, Leninist interpretation of, the dialectic. You arrive at a final result. You put two ideas together, you smash them together, and what comes out, the third thing that comes out is, I don't know if I'd say the ideal result, but this is part of the whole process of the dialectic is to get to that third result, and it kind of everything kind of keeps spinning, keeps dialecting out of that. What we're really talking about is something we could sum up as the malleability of the film image. This idea that film does not have a relationship to objective reality. It's not recording reality. It's that the highest expression of film is to create new ideas. And so by juxtaposing, by putting images together, you arrive at new ideas through these collisions of imagery, of moments. But the whole point is kind of that the film is not meant to capture reality. It's meant to create reality. It's meant to, in the mind, we could say in the mind of the viewer, like you said.
Yeah, I think that's an important quality to introduce here in this discussion of Andrei Rublev, because, to just give a little bit of synopsis about what this film is about, it's an epic that follows the life of this great medieval Russian icon painter, Andrei Rublev, a real historical figure, but it goes about telling this story in a very unconventional way, not at all a way that you would expect a historical biography drama to play out. Its narrative is structured chronologically, more or less. It involves some flashbacks, but it's composed by a series of vignettes, or as Tarkovsky calls them, novellas, and their unity is not immediately apparent in terms of the progression of the narrative or of a particular plot. So even in the arrangement of these vignettes, these scenes from Andrei Rublev's life, there is this kind of juxtaposition, this odd arrangement that you have to look somewhere else for its internal logic, and it really causes you as a viewer to kind of reflect. And I think that perhaps, Tarkovsky's goal in that is to, as you said, Nathan, to engender or to create an idea or a feeling, something more than just, here's the story of Andrei Rublev's life.
Absolutely. And sort of just to, I know I kind of got sideswiped on the Soviet film theory track, for which to kind of bring this all back into the context of Tarkovsky's life. He started making films at a period when there was this thawing of the idea of what a Soviet film could be, and incorporating other cultural influences, other film cultures in that, so that you get in this kind of loosening up of this idea that film is not meant to simply be a political ideological hammer. And then, even in the 1930s under Stalin, we had this school of Socialist Realism, this idea, of showing the workers, the proletariat, in the best possible light. It was very ideologically driven, but it used very kind of romantic imagery. It wasn't, and so there's these very like doctrinaire kind of schools of what a Soviet film should be. And then we get into this period, into the 50s and the early 60s, and not just Tarkovsky, but many filmmakers are kind of playing around. They're experimenting with what this means. And so then you end up with, that's essentially this period which allows a highly individual artist like Tarkovsky to approach the question of another highly individual artist, Andrei Rublev, an individual artist who had a profound effect on Russian culture. It's interesting to me as a North American, far removed from Soviet Union in the 60s, and just from Russian culture in general, to see how so much of what, if you read Tarkovsky's comments leading up to the production of Andrei Rublev and even afterwards, the paramount idea seems to be that what you were saying, James, about this sort of what ties these vignettes together. Tarkovsky is very much on record talking about it as this kind of ode to the Russian spirit. It's very much a nationalist kind of project to recover Russianness, to recover something. There seems to be this longing, and I'm not a scholar of Russian history. I'm assuming this kind of goes in with the general vibe of the Khrushchev thought, but there seems to be this kind of quest for who are we really? Who after everything that's happened with the revolution, Stalin, the war, and the ways in which this also shows up in our artistic practices. Really, who are we? And they turn back to Andrei Rublev.